Hello, fellow parents and educators. Thank you for joining me at Education Evolution, where we are disrupting the status quo in today's learning models. We talk about present-day education, what's broken, who's fixing it, and how. I'm Dr. Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your host and founder of Education Evolution and the Microschool Coalition, where we are fiercely committed to changing the narrative, to reimagining the education landscape and creating learning that serves all children and prepares them to thrive. Hi, Jon. Thank you for joining us today on Education Evolution.
It's great to be here, Maureen.
Jon, if I had an award for Educational Innovator of the Millennium, I truly would give it to you. I am so impressed that you not only co-created this whole flipped learning model, but you have taken it to such a profound level with Flipped Learning 3.0. Would you tell my audience a little bit about what this whole flipped learning business is?
Well, first of all, let me say this. I'm not the inventor of flipped learning. I would say that I was one of the pioneers. If you really look back to the history of flipped learning, Joseph Platt, I think his name was, in 1999 wrote an article in the Journal of Economic Education where he talked about something called inverted learning. But then in 2006-07, when Aaron Sams and I first started to play around with this, we didn't know that they existed. And so we sort of co-developed it. And, he did it with videotapes and stuff like that. So you can imagine trying to flip your class with videotapes. And we came around at the right time with the right idea. We thought it was our idea, but we rather call ourselves the pioneers, if you will, the ones who kind of helped to bring it to fruition. And, since then, obviously, we've had an amazing opportunity to see it grow around the world. And now in the context that we're at now with COVID and the stuff that's happening right now, there's such a huge interest in flipped learning. I'm just blown away by how this is accelerating the power and the message of flipped learning.
Absolutely. And that's nice of you to cite where some of the origins came from. I think we all dive in and do things and aren't always aware of who else might be doing it out there, but it's amazing what you have done. And one of the things this podcast is about is disrupting the status quo in education. And I know you address that in your TEDx talk on ending educational malpractice. What do you think needs to be disrupted in terms of our educational system?
We're doing the wrong things at the wrong time. I mean, what's been going on for the last 100 years. In fact, I'd argue that this is something that's only the last maybe 200 years. If you go back deep in the history of education, what you find is that education, say Socratic education, Confucianistic, I don't know if that's the right word, whatever. Education was much more about exploration and learning and questioning, the Socratic model, right? And then when the Industrial Revolution hit, we tried to teach kids, who had as Sir Ken Robinson says, they all had the same birth date. And so we put them all together, and we're trying to deliver the same thing at the same time to all students who are not at the right place. So we're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. What we need to do is we need to do the hard stuff, okay, when they're present with their teacher. That's what teachers need to be present for. That's in the group space, let's say in the flipped learning world, or the times when you're physically together. So when I'm with my students later today, now albeit online in a synchronous classroom, we're going to be doing the hard stuff with them, because what they've done is they've done the easy stuff. They've watched a cheesy video that I made about the weather, and we're gonna have a conversation about the weather today when we go deeper with them in my class. Right now it's a virtual classroom, but it's my classroom.
That makes perfect sense. I can remember in the 1980s, my college teacher prof was talking about lecture is the least effective form of education. And it was ironic because he was lecturing to us nonstop. I have to admit, I go a little crazy when educators say, oh yeah, we're flipped. And then I see what they do. And yes, they have sent home a video of part of their lesson, but then the whole class period is more lecture. It's like, wait, no, you're missing the boat. Could you explain what this active learning is and what ideally is happening in the classroom when the flip is going home?
Yeah, the key to flip learning isn't actually the cheesy video the teacher sends home. It's what you do in class. So the best picture I can draw for you guys is if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, right? Bloom's taxonomy starts at the bottom. It says knowledge and then understanding and then application, analysis, evaluation, creation. As you go up that, it gets more difficult. The filter that you should use when you're trying to figure out what should you do in class? Big question. The biggest question about education, I would argue, is what do you do with your class time? What's the best use of your face-to-face class time? And I'm going to argue it's the higher order Bloom's taxonomic things. Apply, analyze, evaluate, create. That's what you should be doing in your class. You can't apply something you know nothing about. So there's still a need for some pre-work so they can get familiar, not master, become familiar with the context of the things that they're going to be learning about and going deeper with. That's the heart and soul of it, guys, is what active things can you do in your class to get them to do stuff. So, for example, my students over the weekend, okay, this is a weird COVID thing. They did an experiment at home, and I've watched some of their videos. They did an experiment at home where this is what I probably would have done this in class, but due to Corona, not. But they did an experiment at home with salt water and food coloring. And they're trying to find, to explore the densities of how water flows. It's how ocean currents work, stuff like that leads to weather, all kinds of interesting things. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of dissect that and make sure that they understand the meaning of that and the connection that has with ocean currents and weather. So that's the focus of today's lesson that we're going to be talking about. But that's an active thing. We would have had it, if I was face to face, we would have done the same thing. We actually would have done this in class, and then we would have had a chance to go deeper and discuss it in class. Now they still watched a cheesy video, though they gave them how to do it. Actually, what instructions I gave them, I said, don't watch the video until you do the experiment. I want you to do the home experiment first. So it's more of an inquiry base, right? I don't want them to just know the answer by watching the video. But some students will still not understand it. So the video's there maybe to kind of pick up the pieces.
That makes perfect sense. I think a passion of mine that really drives me, and I know it led me to open my micro school in 2013, is I am horrified and terrified by the mental health statistics of our youth. I'm just, the amount of depression and anxiety in our youth and how that's playing out as they go out into the workforce as millennials is just horrific. And I really think that you have a mission in your Flip Learning 3.0 of reaching every student that can be a part of the solution. Can you talk a little bit about your mission?
Yeah, it kind of crystallized my mission in life, for lack of a better term, just about a year ago. And I was like reevaluating myself. I've been following a leadership guru, Michael Hyatt, for what it's worth, and he encourages people to take a sabbatical. And so I took 2 weeks, unplugged, and kind of rethought life. And I realized that the mission of my life is to reach every student, which is actually the subtitle of our first book that Aaron Sams and I wrote together. But I really see that, at least from a professional perspective, that's what it's about. And flip learning at its heart, and some people ask me this question, why does flip learning work? And now there's tons of research studies, and we can categorically say that it works. And there's not been too much on sort of the efficacy and what causes it to work. But anyways, I think there's two answers. Number one, active learning. Okay. As we just been talking about earlier. But I think number two is relationships. That key word is, can you reach every student? And the beauty of flip learning teachers, and if you're a flip learning teacher, you know this. I've talked to thousands of you out there, most of you one-on-one personally, you know that you have better relationships with your students because you have more time to be with kids, and you can reach every student in every class every day. You can have a conversation with each of them. Not as easy in the COVID world, but I'm trying to make it happen. I'm actually doing check-ins with every kid. Little things like, tell me about your favorite pet. And I can tell you, in the COVID world, we had bunnies appearing on the screen. We had dogs and cats. I mean, and today I'm going to ask them what's their favorite book, because they're feeling isolated right now. Because they are isolated. Let's be honest. And there is this angst, and education is so much more about that human element, that reaching every student piece, than it is necessarily about learning, weather and oceans and whatever I'm teaching.
Absolutely. That makes me think of the work I've done on as an accreditation lead for Advanced Ed and Cognia. And one of the criteria in the classroom observations is, does every student have an adult they're connected with? That connection piece is so important, that it's something that is observed and counted when we're doing accreditation visits. I guess that makes me a little bit frustrated when people are like, oh yeah, it was really easy for me to go to remote when with the COVID because, oh yeah, we're already flipped and piece of cake. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it is so hard for my micro school. We are coming up with all kinds of crazy, fun, interactive ways to make sure kids still feel connected. We're synchronous, but still it's not enough just to see faces on a screen. So for you to say that you're going out of your way to make that relationship piece happen from a distance, that sounds much more authentic than, oh yeah, a piece of cake for me to go to remote learning, because I think we're missing the whole human connection piece. What do you think?
Absolutely. Actually, I've planned a day this week where we're going to play. I just sensing, I have my kids, I believe in reflection. And so at the end of every class, their checkout is that they open up a Google Doc, a shared Google Doc with me. So it's just between me and them. And they reflect on what they've learned. And I also asked them last week, how is distance learning, remote learning going for you? And a lot of them are they're struggling. So, I got to see kind of into their hearts, and I thought we need a day to just play. So this week we're going to do a scavenger hunt, not today. We're going to do it 2 days from now, whatever. But those kinds of things. So let's play. We're going to everyone go find something red and then some. Yeah. I don't know. I had to figure out a prize. I haven't got it all worked out yet, but we need to have ways to connect. Another way that I've connected, I think it's been really appreciative of the students as I flipped some feedback. So my students had to send in a project. So they did a project. It was just kind of a written paper or a video. They had a lot of choices, whatever. And then I created a video for each kid and then shared it with them. I used to Screencastify, whatever. And I was on screen. I talked directly to them, told them, that I was thinking of them. We're a faith-based school. So I even said, I've been praying for you, which is true. And just talk to them. And then I evaluated. I said, hey, I loved your paper. This is the parts that I liked about it. Or your video made me laugh here, or whatever. Because I just felt like, and then I got some great feedback for them. They just said, hey, thanks for doing that. I mean, one girl, she said, I couldn't understand why you were talking at me, and she didn't turn her voice on. And then she just, she said, wow, that was really cool. I was muted, and that was fun. But, stuff like that. Those are the ways to make connections, even when, you can't be with them face to face.
That is so powerful. And it's not easy for you to do that for each one of your students. It is crazy hard. Not only does it take that much time, but then you have to really have feedback for each kid that's specific. So I would encourage anybody that thinks, oh yeah, going remote is easy, to look at the ways it could be so much better. It's not about dispensing knowledge from a distance. It's about these connections. And your example is beautiful. Thank you, Jon.
I thought, I'm one of the pioneers of flipped learning. Me moving to, remote learning, I thought, yeah, I've got this. I didn't have this, Maureen. I'm telling you, when I got to day 4, I melted down. I was almost in tears. I mean, I was like, this is hard. I just sat on my laptop and I vented on Facebook. I just said, this is hard, this remote learning thing. I thought, if anybody, I would have been the one ready. And I'm an empty nester. I don't have kids screaming. I mean, I thought, and it's been so hard for me. It's working, I think, because I'm, a lot of hours. And then I think of my colleagues who've got little kids at home. I've got a quiet house, at least 2 days a week. My wife's working where she's at. She's a nurse, and I don't have the distractions. I mean, I do have a background. I think it probably was easier for me. That means it's that much harder for people who don't have the background. I mean, I know the tech, I know all that stuff. This is really hard for teachers in schools right now.
I completely agree. Yeah. Yes, we do a morning check-in now that we're on Zoom, and all of our teachers get on, and there's 13 of us, and tired faces. This is not easy. I'm with you on that.
But, I read an article by somebody, my principal sent it to me. One thing that is good about this may sound weird, but every school now is a startup, was the article said, overnight. They have to think like a startup, and teachers have stepped up. What I'm seeing on social media, in articles, and this has been an amazing thing. And I really think that schools will never be the same again after after COVID-19 passes through us. I think in some of these will be very positive. That doesn't negate the difficulty that we're facing now and the tragedy. I mean, before this, we talked about one of the great flipped class teachers in the world. He just shared with me this morning, literally 20 minutes ago, that his neighbor had just passed with COVID. So, I mean, we are living in such interesting times. So
absolutely. And hopefully a silver lining will be that education never returns to the status quo where it was. I have a final question for you, and I love adding in a little bit of whimsy. So, Jon, I know it's scary and hard to break the status quo, as we've talked about, from like the 1880s, our educational model. But if you were the global king in the kingdom of education, how would you transform our education so that all kids were able to be reached every day?
We talked about me doing flip learning, but I'm really doing flip mastery, where the students have to master the content as they move through their pace. That's more difficult, by the way, online. And if I were to, wave my magic wand, I do believe that the mastery model is the biggest game changer. It's like flipped 2.9, I don't know, 3.8, I don't know, where the students can move through the content. So when a student can't go beyond, say, in my class, to the next unit, so to speak, until they have passed the previous test with, and somewhat arbitrarily, I've chosen an 80%. So they've got to get an 80% on an exit exam before they move on. That's not completely true. They can move on, but they still have to stay there and learn that content. And that's so powerful because kids actually learn the content. What we've done for so long. Heck, and I did this. I confess, when I first started teaching, when we got to a test, I gave a test on Friday, right? And then on Monday, I moved on. And some kids got 89s and 95s, but some kids got 44s. And they just got lost. And we now know how to do this. This is, I've found some verbiage around this, is that in 1984, Benjamin Bloom wrote an article where he talks about the double sigma effect. And he talked about the power of, the most effective teaching method in the world is what he says, mastery learning coupled with, one-on-one tutoring. So one-on-one tutoring, but, we can't afford one-on-one tutoring unless you're the, king of England or whatever. And so he challenged the world and he said, if someone could come up with a way that the average teacher can do, and we could still get the effects of the double sigma, one-on-one with mastery, it would be an educational accomplishment of the greatest magnitude, or I forget the exact quote, something to that. That's pretty close. And we found it. It's called flip mastery. It works. It works. I've seen it in my own classes. I've seen it around the world, and we need to all do it. I've seen it working in every context, in rich schools and poor schools, public schools, private schools, math, science, history, English, you name it. It works. But it's like competency-based learning on steroids. It'll work. We just need to start doing it.
I completely agree. It works at our school. It's hard though, because it means kids are in different places and we have to double back and help some kids. It also means some kids master things early and we have to figure out, do we advance them? Do we use enrichment? I think you are so right. We can't just keep promoting kids on to the next level, again, based on their birth date, when they may not have mastered the skills. So I'm with you. If you're ever king of the kingdom of education, I want that mastery learning too. Thank you, Jon. Thank you for walking your talk. You're back in the classroom honing your skills even more now. Thank you for trailblazing for the educators of the world. And thank you for joining me today on Education Evolution and just sharing with our audience the great work that needs to be done in education.
It's been my pleasure.
Wow, Jon is amazing. Flipped learning is something that I have been sold on since before I opened my micro school. And it is one of the 4 pillars of our Leadership Preparatory Academy. Starting a micro school meant I could pick the very best educational practices. And in my mind, Jon Bergman's work with flipped learning is perhaps the most important educational innovation of this millennium. It really checks all of the boxes. When Jon said we're doing the wrong things at the wrong time, that should be obvious. When we look at Socrates and Confucius and look at how they modeled being sage teachers, it wasn't about them talking at students. It was about them posing questions and pondering and having the students explore learning, and the students were in charge of the thinking. It's tragic that we let the Industrial Revolution turn our students into widgets, that if they're born within a 12-month period, that they're placed in this container and they move at this pace. So if they're brilliant in math or need a little extra help in English, too bad. This container moves at this set pace. And if they don't get the test on Friday right, doesn't matter. Monday is a new subject. Classes move on. This is tragic and doesn't have to be. The beauty of flipped learning is that it uses Bloom's taxonomy to the best possible degree. And I will put more information on this taxonomy in my show notes if you're not familiar with it. Bottom line, Benjamin Bloom's work said that in this triangle, the basic pieces of learning, kids need to remember things, understand things. That's just a basic foundation, just the bottom two levels. Unfortunately, a lot of education ends at those two levels because the rest is pretty darn hard work, and it means the students have to be directing their learning, which is also uncomfortable for some teachers. But we want kids to be able to apply their learning, analyze it, synthesize it, evaluate it, and create. This is where design thinking has been really becoming a more popular concept because kids do all of this thinking and they're truly engaged. The beauty of flipped learning is the bottom part of this triangle happens in a pre-work video that's sent home. So the teacher talk is less. It's just the basics, just to familiarize the kids with the concepts. And then synchronously, which was the word Jon used. That means when we're face to face in the same learning environment, and it can be over a video conference. It doesn't have to be in the physical space, but where the teachers are present and can guide the learning, ask some probing questions, speed up things, slow things down, check for understanding. That is synchronous learning. And we need that kind of a learning model for students to be able to get to those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Flipped learning does that. It takes that teacher from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. And it means the learning is in the hands of the kids. Perfect. I also liked that Jon said that the heart and soul of flipped learning is creating active things for kids to do to get to that higher level of thinking. Sitting and being talked at is not active. It's not student directed, and it's not best practice. So if you walk into a class and the teacher is doing all of the heavy lifting, something is wrong. For sure, that teacher has his or her high school diploma. It should be the kids thinking and earning their diploma. I was really touched when Jon shared that the mission of his life is to reach every student. I feel the same way, and I feel an extra special tug when I think of kids that are perhaps underdogs or outliers. I just really feel like we need to reach every kid, and those kids that aren't graduating or aren't making it to school because of anxiety, we need to reach every kid. And relationships really make it so that it's easier for kids to show up and have success. And flipped learning is beautiful because the active learning also allows teachers to build those relationships. As they're moving around the room, they're assessing and they're like, wow, that is really great. Or have you considered this? Or, hey, no worries. Let's have you do the mastery test again tomorrow. And maybe you can just do it out loud with me instead of writing it out because I just need to see that you have the concepts. So the relationships built when teachers get to observe and make those connections is priceless, and it should be non-negotiable in every classroom. Jon summed that up by saying education is so much more about that human element than whatever I'm teaching. Absolutely. Even into our higher ed model, when it's lecturing at students, I know that that's considered the standard in the ivory tower, but it really should not be about talking at students at any level. Just saying. When I worked in a school within a school in a large public high school, the saying that was a reminder to us in regards to letting the students have the power and also letting them know that we care deeply was that kids don't care what we know until they know that we care. I was intrigued and optimistic when Jon mentioned that after COVID-19, schools will never be the same again. That could be such an amazing thing. With our crazy high dropout rates, with the amount of anxiety and depression in our teens and tweens, things do need to change. And I talked about that in episode 1. So what if we said, whoa, large school districts were not nimble in this crisis and large is not serving our kids well enough? What if we said something wild like no school district could have more than 5,000 kids? No school could have more than 500 kids. What if we rethought things not on economics, but on what's best for kids? What if we took this Pony Express of education, basically the same model we've had since the 1800s, and turned it into an Amazon next day delivery system? Every other part of our society has evolved. Maybe this could be the shakeup that we need for education to get the support and the funding so that it too can evolve and really take advantage of modern resources. Jon concluded by talking about flipped mastery. To me, this is so foundational. He called it the mastery model, the biggest game changer. I completely agree. We have to know that kids are mastering their content before they move on. I don't know how it is everywhere, but in Washington State, a lot of kids get moved on through middle school pretty much no matter what. And so if they have a 60% sixth grade, they're moved on to seventh. 60% moved on to eighth. 60% moved on to ninth. So when we get them in ninth grade, the deficits are enormous. And it didn't have to be that way. They could have had a solid foundation. They could have had a chance to retake tests if they didn't get them, to perhaps have more time for testing, to give tests orally instead of having to write them, or to type them instead of write them. We need to make sure kids are mastering their content before they're moving on. And how cool would it be if we had a system where if they demonstrated mastery with pre-tests, they got to move on more quickly or go into enrichment activities and not sit and be bored and disenchanted with learning? Our present model needs to have mastery added to it everywhere. My big takeaways from listening to Jon Bergman, I think there were 3. First, learning can and should be engaging, active, and exploration by students. 2, relationships in school are not optional. We need models of learning, like flipped learning, that support this basic human need. And 3, flipped mastery with students demonstrating knowledge before they're moved on should be non-negotiable. It should be a no-brainer. You really don't want me out there driving until I've passed the driver's ed test and demonstrated my competency. Come on. We do this in every other aspect of the world. Why wouldn't we want this for our precious, precious children? A little bit about Jon. He is the educational leader of the Flipped Learning Global Initiative, which is a worldwide coalition of educators, researchers, technologists, professional development providers, and educational leaders. They are in 49 countries, and this coalition is committed to effectively reaching every student every day through flipped learning. You can go to flglobal.org for a ton of powerful resources and online certification classes. And all of the teachers at my micro school have taken at least one of these online certification classes. And for us, they're a wonderful brush up and they're foundational. And because they're flipped, you can go back and watch the flips over again. And you get to learn from a wide variety of educators, elementary through college, around the world, that are really reaching every kid every day. Jon Bergman, flipped learning pioneer and mission-driven educator. You are a blessing to the world of education. Thank you, thank you, thank you. again for listening. To support the education evolution, subscribe so it lands in your podcast app and gets out to more decision makers. Then rate and review it. For more information and show notes, go to educationevolution.org. Education Evolution listeners, you are the ones to ensure we create classrooms where each student is seen, heard, valued, and thriving. We are in this together, and we need you. Let's go out and reach every student today. Thank you for listening. Signing off, I am Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your partner in boldly reimagining education.